Colonel Potter, sir, my last wish is to be buried in my mother's wedding gown.
I've seen these Dodgers for 40 years, all the tricks. Dismissed!
Picture the most beloved sitcom cast in television history slowly falling apart, one goodbye at a time, and almost nobody outside the writer's room knowing why. That's the story hiding underneath one of the most celebrated shows ever made. For 11 seasons, audiences fell in love with a ragtag group of doctors and nurses stationed in a war zone, laughing through the chaos and crying through the losses. But behind the camera, cast members were quietly walking away, some in anger, some in exhaustion, and some simply because they had nothing left to give the role. Today we're going deep into the real reasons these actors left one of the greatest shows in television history, and a few of these stories might genuinely surprise you. Before we get into the departures themselves, it helps to understand what this show actually meant to the people watching it, because that context explains why every single exit felt like such a gut punch to audiences at the time. The series was born from a novel written by a former military surgeon who had served in a mobile army hospital during the Korean War, and that first-hand experience gave the source material a strange blend of dark comedy and genuine trauma that hadn't really been attempted on network television before. A film adaptation came first, catching the attention of a nation gripped by an ongoing and deeply unpopular war overseas, and the parallels between a fictional Korean conflict and the very real headlines about Vietnam were impossible to miss. When the television version launched in the early 70s, it kept that same uneasy mixture of jokes and heartbreak, but stretched it out across years of storytelling, giving the characters room to grow, crack, and change in ways a 2-hour film never could. The show almost didn't survive its first season. Ratings were shaky enough that cancellation was a real possibility, and it took a scheduling gamble, moving the series to a new night, to give it room to find its audience. Once it did, the show became something closer to a cultural institution than a simple comedy. It broke format conventions left and right, using actual documentary-style war footage, refusing to lean on a laugh track during its most serious scenes, and treating its ensemble cast less like a group of jokesters and more like a family bonded by trauma. As the seasons went on, the show leaned harder into that emotional realism, and one actor in particular became the creative engine behind that shift. He didn't just play the lead character, he began writing and directing episodes, shaping the show's voice from the inside. That evolution made the series richer and more daring with every passing year, but it also meant the show around it started to change shape, and not every original cast member felt like there was still room for them inside it. That tension is really where our story begins, because the first major departure from the show wasn't just a scheduling issue or a contract dispute, it became one of the most talked about moments in television history. The character in question was the affectionately bumbling commanding officer of the unit, a man who never seemed fully in control of anything happening around him but who brought a warmth and decency that balanced out the sharper personalities surrounding him. The actor who played him had been part of the show since day one, and his performance earned him major early recognition, including a prestigious award for his comedic work. On the surface, everything looked great. Underneath, the actor had grown restless. As the show increasingly centered around its lead character, the roles surrounding him started to feel smaller by comparison, and this actor had bigger ambitions than being a supporting piece of someone else's story. He wanted to headline his own project, to be the name above the title rather than one voice in a crowded ensemble, and by the end of the third season, he made the decision to leave the show entirely. What happened next changed the way television handled cast departures forever. Instead of quietly writing the character off, sending him home on a transfer or a convenient reassignment the way most sitcoms would have done, the writers chose something far riskier. They wrote an episode where the character finally receives his long-awaited discharge orders, and the first 25 minutes play out like the happiest send-off imaginable, full of laughter, hugs, and celebration. Then, in the final moments, one of the younger characters walks into the operating room and delivers the news in a flat, devastating voice. The plane carrying their former commander has gone down over open water with no survivors. There's no music, no comedic beat to soften the blow, just stunned silence and the sound of surgical equipment. It was one of the first times a network sitcom had killed off a major character permanently, without warning, and audiences reacted exactly the way you'd expect. The network was flooded with letters, some praising the bravery of the choice, others furious that a character they loved had been taken away so abruptly. The show's creative team defended the decision by pointing out that this was, at its core, a story about war, and war doesn't always let everybody go home safely. As for the actor himself, his post-show career didn't go the way he had hoped. He landed a new sitcom deal fairly quickly, but the show struggled to find an audience and was cancelled after a single season. A second attempt at leading his own series fared even worse, becoming something of a punchline rather than the breakout hit he had envisioned. Looking back on the decision years later, he acknowledged with some regret that leaving had cost him a kind of magic that simply couldn't be recreated elsewhere, admitting that walking away from the show meant walking away from an opportunity he would never fully replace. Former castmates spoke fondly of him after his passing decades later, remembering him as a genuinely warm presence both on screen and off. In a strange way, his dramatic exit ended up defining the show's legacy just as much as anything he did while he was on it, proving that sometimes the biggest impact an actor makes is in the way they leave. If that departure was loud, dramatic, and impossible to ignore, the next major exit was almost the exact opposite: quiet, unresolved, and handled with none of the ceremony that came before it. This actor played one half of the original comedic duo that had defined the show's earliest, loosest seasons, a wisecracking surgeon whose chemistry with the lead character felt effortless and electric. Audiences adored the pairing. But behind the scenes, this actor had signed on believing the show would remain a true ensemble piece with balanced screen time for everyone involved. As the series matured and the lead character absorbed more and more of the emotional and narrative weight, thanks in large part to that actor's growing influence as a writer and director, this other actor watched his own role shrink into something closer to a sidekick who simply reacted to everyone else's storylines. Rather than making a public fuss about it, he handled his exit quietly. He simply chose not to renew his contract once the third season wrapped, and the producers reportedly didn't even realize he was gone until shortly before production began on the next season. What made the situation even stranger was the fact that his original contract had never actually been formally signed, meaning his entire tenure on the show had technically operated on a handshake agreement. When the production team considered legal action over his departure, they discovered they had no real grounds to pursue it, since there was no signed contract to have broken in the first place. His exit left the writers scrambling, forced to quickly explain his character's absence in the opening minutes of the next season with a brief line about him being discharged while the lead character happened to be away. There was no farewell episode, no emotional send-off, nothing. He was simply gone, and a new character was introduced almost immediately to fill the gap he left behind. Audiences were not thrilled. Losing two major original cast members back-to-back within roughly a year felt jarring, and plenty of viewers wondered whether the show could hold itself together. In hindsight, though, many longtime fans and critics have argued that this transition actually deepened the series rather than weakening it. The replacement character brought a more grounded, emotionally layered energy that pushed the show away from pure buddy comedy and toward something more reflective. As for the actor who left, he didn't fade into obscurity. He continued acting for a while before pivoting into an entirely different career path, becoming a successful financial commentator and investor, eventually appearing regularly on business-focused television discussing markets and economics. Despite the abrupt and somewhat awkward nature of his departure, there didn't seem to be any lingering resentment between him and his former co-stars. The lead actor later described him as one of the sharpest people he'd ever worked alongside, and the two apparently remained close for decades afterward, a friendship that outlasted the show itself and only ended with this actor's passing years later. Not every departure on this show was about ambition or creative frustration. Some were about something far more human: burnout, mental health struggles, and the simple need to reclaim a life that had quietly slipped away. That brings us to the actor who played the unit's endearing, almost telepathic company clerk, a character famous for hearing incoming helicopters before anyone else even noticed them. This character brought a childlike sweetness to a show otherwise filled with sarcasm and gallows humor, and the actor behind him was the only cast member to reprise a role from the original film version, bringing a softer, more vulnerable take on the character than what audiences had seen on the big screen. His performance became so beloved that many considered him practically irreplaceable. But by the later seasons, that beloved performance was coming at a real personal cost. The grueling production schedule, combined with the actor's own perfectionism, wore him down over time, and he privately struggled with anxiety and depression at a point in television history when mental health simply wasn't something actors talked about publicly. On top of that, he was raising a young family, and the demanding hours on set meant long stretches away from his wife and daughter, something he later admitted he deeply regretted. He also felt he wasn't receiving the recognition or flexibility he deserved given how central his character was to the show, and disputes over pay and scheduling only added to his frustration. Producers tried to accommodate him where they could, granting additional time off and reducing his episode count, but ultimately it wasn't enough to keep him from wanting out entirely. Unlike the earlier abrupt exit, this departure was given real emotional weight. The show built a two-part farewell storyline around his character's exit, one that ranks among the most tender and quietly devastating arcs in the entire series. In it, the character returns from a short leave to find the unit falling apart without him, tries desperately to fix everything the way he always had, and ultimately realizes it's time to go home for good, called back by family responsibilities and a farm in need of saving. The final image of that storyline, the character walking away alone, silhouetted against the sky with his stuffed animal left behind on a friend's bunk, remains one of the most emotionally resonant moments the show ever produced. After leaving, the actor took a lengthy step back from the spotlight altogether, appearing in a short-lived spin-off before largely walking away from Hollywood. He redirected his energy into painting, wildlife conservation, and even inventing, eventually holding patents related to fishing equipment. He later explained that his decision to leave came down to two things above all else: wanting to be present for his family and needing to recover from burnout that had quietly built up over years of demanding work. Then there was the actor who played the show's original comic antagonist, a rigid, rule-obsessed officer whose petty insecurities and secret romantic entanglement made him the perfect target for the other characters' pranks. For years, this character served an important function, giving the ensemble someone to unite against and providing an easy source of comedy. But as the show matured and its other characters grew more layered and complex, this particular role stayed frozen in place, stuck delivering the same one-note antagonism season after season while everyone around him evolved. The actor playing him, who clearly had far more range than the part allowed him to show, eventually felt he had taken the character as far as it could go. Rather than being pushed out or written off in conflict, he simply chose not to renew his contract once his 5th season wrapped, later explaining that he felt he'd exhausted everything interesting the role had to offer. His departure ended up being something of a turning point for the series as a whole. With the show's built-in cartoonish villain gone, the writers no longer needed a punching bag character to generate easy laughs, and the comedy that followed leaned more heavily into irony, empathy, and the absurdity of the war itself rather than slapstick cruelty directed at one hapless officer. His character was written out off-screen entirely, given a vague promotion rather than any dramatic send-off, which meant his exit barely registered within the show's own story even as it quietly reshaped its tone going forward. The actor continued working steadily in guest roles across television and film, though he never again landed a part as widely recognized as the one he left behind. In many ways, his departure marked the moment the series shifted from being a very good ensemble comedy into something more ambitious and emotionally layered, even if it meant losing one of its founding pieces of chemistry to get there.